Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel and this is the Hour of the Raven, your channel for everything Ravenloft, RPG, Dungeons and Dragons, and horror.
Today, we will explore the history of Lamordia, where the past is shrouded in mist and forgotten by the pragmatic mindset of its inhabitants. Before we begin, a few brief clarifications and comments. This video will focus on Lamordia from the classic Ravenloft setting, and will consider the events and characters that existed in the domain before the reboot carried out by Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. At the end of my video coverage of Lamordia from the classic Ravenloft setting, I will make some considerations and comparisons with the new version of Lamordia in the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Are you ready? After surviving yet another shipwreck, we swam across a frozen sea until we reached the cold island of Agony. Amidst a desolate landscape and a blizzard, we searched for shelter, where we could dry off and protect ourselves from the cold of the blizzard. The snow-covered ground opened beneath our feet, and we fell into a network of underground caves. This unexpected shelter from the blizzard reveals even more secrets, as the place seemed to be inhabited, and we found rooms with bookshelves filled with books. Whoever inhabited these depths seems obsessed with seeking knowledge about the region and its inhabitants. Searching among the numerous books in the place, we found scribbled notes from its mysterious inhabitant, who seems to be doing an in-depth research into the history of Lamordia.
Hour of the Raven.
The history of Lamordia is a mystery to be unraveled, and those who delve into its past find more questions than answers. Contrary to what one might expect in a region so intellectually and scientifically advanced, historical records about Lamordia's past are sparse, imprecise, and sometimes contradictory. Although some aristocratic families have paintings and records of a long line of ancestors on their properties, there is a lack of reliable historical records prior to the date of Lamordia's emergence in the Land of the Mists. This circumstance may seem disturbing to many, but the Lamordians face this lack of historical records with their characteristic pragmatism. Why delve into a distant past when their ancestors didn't bother to leave any record, and when the needs of the present and the promise of the future prove so more interesting? This void in Lamordia's past continues to attract the attention of scholars and experts from the Land of the Mists, especially those dedicated to studying the supernatural nature of this world. One disturbing theory claims that not only Lamordia, but also other nations of the Lands of the Mists did not have a true past before emerging from the mists, and that the mythical dark powers can create reality from the matter of the mists, creating locations, cities, people, and even a false history to give some coherence to this simulacrum of reality. If this theory proves correct, the implications would be terrible. Who among us are true souls, and who are only false people, merely soulless simulacrums created from the mist for some sinister purpose? How much of someone's histories and memories are fabricated by supernatural forces? It is important to highlight, however, that most enlightened minds in Lamordia reject such absurd theories, looking down on those who cling to supernatural explanations, attributing mystical meanings to that which has not yet been unveiled by reason and science. If history can be trusted, however, it is certain that Lamordia was not always as pragmatic and rational as it aspired to be today, and evidence points to a land less agnostic and more devoted to the gods. In one of the monasteries in the Sleeping Beast Mountains, currently occupied by a reclusive order of monks, there is an ancient sanctuary dedicated to the deity Lotur, a god of lightning. Although the worship of Lotur remained in Lamordia's distant past, this abandoned sanctuary seems dedicated to protecting and guarding a powerful evil entity in the depths of the mountain. In Northtenburg, the city's structures also reveal a past forgotten by the records of history. The stones of the city's buildings reveal massive damage from a past conflict, although there are no records of this event in history. The city also has a structure known as the Convent of the Alabaster Helm, a huge sanctuary dedicated to a forgotten goddess called Skogul. The study of its frescoes and archaeology reveals that about 200 years ago, the women cloistered in this convent ruled the village in a theocracy, preaching the wisdom and prowess in battles of their deity. Currently, the building has been converted into a Staatshaus, where the city council meets for deliberations, and the history of this cult and theocratic government has been completely forgotten. Lamordia emerged from the mist in the year 683 of the Barovian calendar, when the mists parted to reveal the existence of these lands northwest of the core. Some ancient records suggest that before this date, Lamordia already existed, completely isolated in the mists, and that it only integrated the core on this date, but there is no consensus among historians. Some years before 683, the first reliable historical records and documents can be found, but these are merely local records, mostly bureaucratic documents and complaints from peasants who report sightings of strange creatures or an increase in the incidence of grave robbery crimes in the region. Most peasants at the time seemed to fear and even openly accused Dr. Victor Mordenheim, a brilliant scientist who conducted experiments on his property. Although no evidence of any action taken by the authorities has been found, the fact is that he was accused of stealing corpses from cemeteries for his experiments, and even of murder. From 683 of the Barovian calendar, however, when Lamordia became part of the core lands, there was a considerable increase in records and reports of sightings of a grotesque creature in the region, which began to haunt the imagination of the population. This monster was said to be responsible for all sorts of violence, murder, and misfortune in the region, like a kind of boogeyman, and earned the nicknames of Snow Killer, Patchwork Man, or simply the Phantom. For nearly a century, this creature has terrorized local folklore, and many believe that it resides in the frigid Isle of Agony, which they refer to as the Devil's Domicile. Most of the population believe that the blame for this monstrosity should fall on the infamous Dr. Victor Mordenheim, believing it to be some profane experiment that escaped from his laboratory. The fact that Dr. Victor Mordenheim seems not to have aged in over a century does not help to dispel the fears of the population, who believe that he has found an alchemical solution to remain eternally young. If we disregard these disturbing accounts, the history of Lamordia can be considered relatively peaceful and stable. As far as the population's memory and records can be consulted, power in the region has always been in the hands of the Aubrecker family. Baron Wilhelm von Aubrecker was a young ruler when Lamordia emerged from the mist. Although he clearly had some military experience, his rule was always lenient in terms of laws, and he showed little interest in governing. His interests were more concerned with his own amusement, and he spent his time on festivities, drinking, balls, and hunting expeditions. His lenient lifestyle and soft rule were threatened, however, by his warlike neighbor, Falkovnia, under the command of the tyrant Vlad Drakov, turned its covetous eyes to the lands of Lamordia. In 695, Falkovnia launched a military campaign against Lamordia. The Falkovnian troops were more numerous and better trained than the Lamordian militia, but von Aubrecker's leadership was effective, and they used their superior weaponry and terrain to their advantage. To invade Lamordia, the Falkovnian forces needed to overcome the mountain range known as the Sleeping Beast, and the Lamordian militia guerrilla managed to hold off the troops until the onset of the Lamordian winter. When the rigors of winter began, the Lamordian forces, wielding superior battle equipments and blunderbusses, repelled the invading forces. The Winter War, as it became known, ended in 696 with the retreat of Falkovnian forces. Tensions between the two nations remained, with the promise of the Falkovnian forces' return, but Baron Wilhelm von Aubrecker achieved a great diplomatic feat when in 703 von Aubrecker and Drakov signed a non-aggression and trade treaty. Falkovnia went from being an enemy and invader to Lamordia's main trading partner, supplying food that is essential to feed its population. Lamordia, in turn, began supplying excellent quality weapons and armor to Falkovnia, improving its military forces. This diplomatic feat helped maintain the stability of Lamordia, while its neighbors around it suffered from war and the constant threat of Falkovnian expansion. Despite the diplomatic tranquility, von Aubrecker's rule was threatened not by political rivals, but by successive tragedies that threatened the succession line of his house. His eldest son, Rudolf von Aubrecker, had inherited his father's taste for parties and extravagances. Most of the population saw him as a selfish and spoiled brat. On his 18th birthday, in the year 712, Rudolf organized a party at sea on the Caravel Hay Feast. When a terrible storm struck the ship, Rudolf and his companions were already drunk, and the crew was unable to save the ship from sinking. The bodies of some were found on the shore, but Rudolf's body was never found, and he is presumed dead, swallowed by the Sea of Sorrows. In the year 739 of the Barovian calendar, tragedy struck the von Aubrecker family again. During a harsh winter, while the family and their servants and guards isolated themselves in their castle, they suffered from an epidemic of madness, spread by the presence of infected fleas. All the inhabitants of the house, including domestic animals, suffered contamination from this insidious disease caused by fleas. Guards fought among themselves, consumed by hallucinations, and some of the servants simply fled in a frenzy to the outside, into the frigid winter, dying of hypothermia. While trying to protect themselves in their mansions, Baron Wilhelm asked his son Hendrik, apparently uninfected, to try using the sleds and ask for help in Neuchtenburg. Hendrik prepared for the expedition, but on his journey he too was overcome by madness, and unable to perceive the harsh weather and protect himself, he ended up dying frozen in the snow. Only Baron Wilhelm and his daughter Greta survived. When a group of adventurers managed to reach their property, they found the girl Greta, driven mad, playing with corpses as if they were dolls, and the Baron desperate for some kind of help. Their madness was healed. However, following the death of his children, Baron Wilhelm seems to suffer from melancholy and depression, and becomes increasingly isolated in his palace. Just 1 year later, in 740, the Land of the Mist was ravaged by the events of the Grand Conjunction. Although the entire lands of the mists was covered in mists and earth tremors, Lamordia remained largely unaffected by these events. Lamordia also has an important naval tradition, and its navigators and explorers were pioneers in discovering the existence of several islands of the Sea of Sorrows. In 685, Lamordian explorers first discovered the island of the Mies, just above the archipelago known as the Finger, where previously there was only open sea. A few years later, in 742, a Lamordian captain discovered the island of Markovia while exploring the Sea of Sorrows, although he didn't manage to reach the coast. In 744, the Lamordian vessel of the Howling Walrus, captained by Leonard Gardner, managed not only to map its coastline, but also to find a safe way to anchor on its shore. The exploration uncovered several exotic animals, and the revelation that this gigantic tropical island was the lost lands of Markovia, which were once in the center of the continent. The rediscovery of Markovia sparked the economic and scientific interest of Lamordia, and Baron Wilhelm von Aubrecker ordered expeditions to try to establish a colony on the island. In 748, the ship Stellaris departed from Lamordia, carrying a group of colonists and soldiers to settle in the region. The vessel successfully reached the island, and they took advantage of an abandoned ruined village to establish themselves. Despite fortifying the village to defend against attacks by beastmen, tragedy struck the place, and the colonists who sheltered there also disappeared, probably victims of disease, beastmen attacks, or even more terrible fates. Over the years, Baron Wilhelm von Aubrecker has reached an advanced age and has never recovered from the melancholy following the tragedy that befell his sons. His daughter, Greta von Aubrecker, is slowly preparing to take over the government after her father passing and continue the rule of Lamordia. While the blizzard ravages the Isle of Agony, we wait in the caves and study the notes on the history of Lamordia. In this underground lair of this mysterious hermit, we find several handwritten notes, some with personal accounts from its mysterious inhabitants. Overcome by immense curiosity, we begin to read a kind of diary with reminiscences and reflections of the strange creature. Subscribe to this channel, activate notifications, and let's explore the past and secrets of Adam, the sinister flesh golem and dark lord of Lamordia.